Hi everyone, 2021 has come and gone, and so has the DKMP Timeline Park Contest. If you haven't heard of it, the DKMP Discord server hosted an ongoing park build event throughout the year. Participants were asked to start in January with a small park of just a few rides. Each month we were prompted with specific attractions to build, and were also asked to write a story chronicling the park's development over time. When I joined this contest, I had only gotten back into the game a few months before and hadn't really done any creative sandbox work up until then. My hope was that this contest would allow me to learn from others, practice some new skills, and of course have fun building something I could eventually be proud of. In this video, I like to show off the park that I built and talk about some of the creative decisions I made during its evolution. And of course I'll show off some cool roller coasters too. I'll have timestamps in the description to note different sections of the video. I won't go through all 12 stages of the park, but here's where we started with stage 1 back in January. So the inspiration for my park is actually based on a real-life park called Sluggers and Putters in Northeast Ohio, sort of close to where I grew up. I've been there a couple times. And as you could guess by the name, they originally started with just a golf course and batting cages, which is what I modeled my park after here. We have our lovely golf course and batting cages. I think Sluggers and Putters has expanded quite a bit since I was a kid. They've got go-karts now, and I think a junior roller coaster as well. So I kind of wanted to get a feel of like rural America-ish, despite not growing up in a rural area myself, but I was kind of familiar with that part of the Midwest. So that's why we have these dense deciduous forests here and long stretches of empty road. One thing I want to point out here to start is I've already made one of my biggest mistakes in the whole Timeline Park, and that is building these roads so far away from the map edges. So what that means is these outer sections here that I'm now coloring in purple, basically I could not use because it was outside of the park boundaries, and since it's a Timeline Park, you have to have a good excuse for tearing up the road and removing these roads to expand the park boundaries. And as you'll see as we go forward, I do wind up managing to tear out this section of the road here, so I do use a lot of this section of the park, but there's a whole bit here that I never wind up building any real rides on. So it really constricted the available space I had, which was unfortunate. It really limited the amount that I could expand my park. And one other thing that would have been nice to start out with at the beginning was having a more varied terrain. As you can see here, the terrain in this park is pretty flat. I did do a little bit of hills here and there, but in general, I was so busy building rides and park infrastructure that I didn't have time to sculpt the terrain as I went. So it started out flat and it stayed pretty flat throughout the contest. So it would probably be to the benefit of the person doing the Timeline Park to start with a little bit more varied terrain, because you're not going to have time to switch it up later, probably. Alright, so we're going to skip ahead a bit here to stage 3, and this is where I started really to start developing the story for my Timeline Park. And in the final reviews, the story for my park was one of the things I got the highest marks on. People really liked the dynamic between two rivaling parks that started here. So if you noticed in stage 1, there was this gas station over here next to the golf course. And I decided it might be fun to have them start to compete with the other park next door, because they were, jealous of their success and kind of mad that they were butting up against their property here. And this doesn't really have a real life inspiration, although this sort of takes cues from a real life gas station in Florida called Supertest, who tried to build a small theme park to attract customers. They didn't have a log flume, they had a merry-go-round and maybe some other flat rides. But I thought that was, a cool little bit of real life inspiration to kind of influence where I wanted my park builds to go. Fun fact, the design of the log flume here is a direct copy of the log flume at the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium, which sadly just got torn down recently, but it will forever remain here in memory. Alright, if we skip ahead here to stage 6, we'll see a very sad scene. This is the point in this story where the neighboring company, the gas station called Dynagas, bought the whole park and took it over from the original owners of Little Sluggers. A very sad day indeed, so we had to have some sad rain in here to set the mood here. But I did like this stage a lot because it finally allowed me to combine the two halves of the park together, and I wasn't restricted as far as where I could do my pathing, which was very helpful for me as a builder. In previous stages, I had a little security hut in this section, which prevented guests from going back and forth in the story. But now I can, open up, add some more paths. We've got a nice new bypass over here and over here to let traffic flow a lot more nicely. So a good instance of where the storyline influenced the build, and that was pretty cool to see happen. All right, skipping ahead further here to stage 9, we were asked to add a themed area to our park. So I have this Roman themed area here with the large wooden coaster. You also see a splash boat, retractable splash boat ride. And if you've been following my YouTube channel, you may notice that quite a few rides in my park have gotten tutorials based off of them. I had learned how to make some of these rides from other people over the course of the contest and incorporate them in my park. And that's why those are the ones that I've made videos of, because they're ones that I know how to make. Sadly, this splash boat did not make it to the end of the contest, as it burned down in stage 10 and was replaced by just a plain building in stage 12, but it does still exist here in stage 9. The only stage that was actually functional. Very sad. But it wasn't a great ride anyway, so what can you do? Alright, here we are at stage 12. There's not too much else to talk about as far as the intermediate stages go, so we'll just do kind of a quick tour of the park, and after that we'll look at some coaster ride-ons. So just to start over here, this is actually where we ended the park in stage 12, but it's the new entrance. This section used to be where the entrance was back in stage 1. It's unrecognizable now. Pretty much everything that I built in stage 1 has been destroyed. Even the golf course, sad to say, has been replaced by the Larson Loop over in the corner of the screen. But I had a lot of fun building these new buildings here, especially with these dark roof pieces here. This sort of building structure has kind of become kind of my go-to style for making larger buildings in the park. One of the lessons I learned pretty early on is that small buildings don't look very good. If you remember back in stage 1, I had a couple tiny buildings for kind of like a gift shop area and a restroom, and they just didn't look good because they were just too small. And started experimenting with some larger building footprints, and I think they look a lot nicer. So that's why you'll see most of the buildings in my park are pretty big, relatively speaking. When I built this market building over here, I thought this was huge, but now it seems kind of small in comparison to everything else. But just traveling through here, we have where our old kind of midway used to be, very back at the beginning of the park. And it's still a pretty nice area, a lot of nice little gardens, not a whole lot going on here ride-wise. There is the train station here to take you to and from the parking lot, which is a little bit redundant now that the guests can just walk to and from, but it's still a nice little scenery to the park. You'll notice a clear delineation here between the two halves of the park, the Little Slugger side and the Dynaguest side, based on what path style I used. The Dynaguest side has the tarmac path, whereas Little Sluggers use the crazy paving. Crazy paving has like long since been my favorite path type, so that's why I like to use it so much for Little Sluggers, and use it pretty extensively throughout the whole park here, at least on this right half. And I think it looks quite nice. Here you can see Cedar Creek Bobber. This is the first shoestring ride I ever built in a park. I learned how to do shoestringing. I think this was in stage 6 or 7, something like that. I wanted to finally learn how to do shoestringing and put in a shoestrung ride, and that is where this came from. One of the things about this ride that I don't like a whole lot is that it's a bit big. I probably would make this smaller if I were to redo this section. But that being said, I still think it looks pretty cool with the mix of like structural supports here and the steel walls. Not my totally favorite part of the park, but something I still look back fondly on. If we pan over here, you can see the Eiffel Tower structure here. This was for the eye catcher stage of the park. We were all asked to build an eye catcher. So I opted to go for an Eiffel Tower that is inspired by the ones you can find at Kings Island and Kings Dominion. You can see I'm using Giga Coaster here for the base of the tower and the diagonal structures that hold it up. Took me a couple iterations to get something that I thought looked pretty good, but I think this area turned out really great. It's a bit of a shame that it's so cramped together. Again, this is kind of a side effect of the fact that my park is so small. It would have been nice to have a little bit more breathing room for this tower. It's very close to these shops and the Dodgems right here. It's kind of nestled into it, but that being said, I'm still pretty proud of this area. I think it looks quite nice. Over here on the Dynagas side of the park, there are some of the older rides that I built in the earlier stages of the park, especially this Steel Coaster here. This is based on a like B&M Floorless design, as you'll see in the ride-ons later in the video. Some of the first work I've done with track architecture for the roof, I try to give it kind of an industrial feel because I do quite like the industrial aesthetic you can get with you know, flat angular pieces like this. So I quite like the way this looks. It's a little bit sparse. It doesn't mesh great with some of the more lush scenery around it, but it's a start at least. In this building here we have Fear Factory, which is a dark ride. For the stage we were asked to build a non-coaster track ride, so most people built a dark ride inside of the building here. If I were to do this one again, I probably wouldn't make the building so rectangular. It's kind of a boring shape. This is based directly off of a reference photo of a building I found online. But I don't think it makes a particularly good ride building. It's not very pretty. I think it's well constructed for what it is, but I don't know if I go quite with this color scheme and aesthetic in the future. And finally over here we have our old ride entrance. When Dynagas took over the park, they had their own grand entrance to the park. I am still quite proud of this entrance. I think the look of the buildings here with the ticket lines and the entrance walkways looks pretty nice. I would probably want to make it a bit bigger, but again, I didn't have a ton of space at the time. But I think the aesthetic here is pretty good, and I am quite happy with the way this turned out. I hope you enjoyed walking through this park a fraction as much as I enjoyed making it. And before we get to the ride-ons and time-lapse, I do want to shout out the DKMP Discord server where this all took place. There are 13 other parks which made it to completion, and they're all worth checking out. My park did wind up winning 3rd place overall, which I'm really proud of. I didn't think I'd score so well. There is a link to the results video in the description if you'd like to see it for yourself. And you can find links to all those parks on the Discord's Timeline Park Contest Archive channel, and I put a link to that in the description below too. There will be another timeline contest in 2022, so if you enjoyed watching the 2021 parks develop, please consider joining. It's about the most fun I've had playing this game all year. Thanks for watching.